This episode of Dispatches from Planet Albany is brought to you with support by New York State United Teachers, which represents more than 600,000 educators and school-related professionals in New York. If you're interested in how your business or interest group can support Dispatches from Planet Albany, contact david.lombardo@wcny.org. And if you're interested in personally supporting the show, visit capitalpressroom.org/donate.
Tuesday before the budget's due, saying there's some progress or whatever, like that is incremental.
Can I ask a question right there? Was that a Speaker Hasty impersonation?
That's usually what it sounds like to me.
Okay, just making sure.
My point is,
do you do Stuart Cousins as well?
I can't do Stuart Cousins.
Okay.
I've also declared war on potholes, so here's the first shot across the bow.
Well, as you know, with Planet Albany, there's always something that makes the planet turn.
And it's this amazing view of D.C., and Eddie Vedder comes out, and he goes, "You have a cigarette?" And I've never smoked in my life, but if I had, I wish that was the moment.
And this strategy takes us from potholes to knotholes.
I would like to say it was a pleasure, Mr. Kim. But I'm on the road.
I'm David Lombardo, and this is Dispatches from Planet Albany, a podcast about power and politics in New York State government. And on this episode, we're doing an exit interview with Ian Pickus, who for 17 years at the NPR affiliate in Albany had a front row seat to the shenanigans at the Capitol. Spending most of his time as news director for the station, he helped coordinate their state government coverage and was in the thick of former Governor Andrew Cuomo's most notable appearances on the station with then CEO Alan Chartock. Pickus left journalism this summer for a communications job with the State Office of Mental Health, and he visited the studio at the end of July before joining the state payroll. And one programming note, stick around after our conversation for our new, hopefully weekly segment, Working Rules, when we'll touch on the issues percolating in the press room here at the Capitol. Well, Ian, thanks so much for making the time, and congrats on this big life change.
Thanks, Dave. It's an honor to help you fill the summer vacation portion of your broadcast schedule.
That's closer to accurate than I'd like to say, but we're glad to have the audio nonetheless. So you made a decision to leave journalism for communications, landing at the State Office of Mental Health. Are there other types of communication jobs that you would have done or would do? Or conversely, are there any jobs in communications that you would never do?
Well, they didn't call me up and offer me the chance to be like the spokesperson for the New York Yankees, so I think that was off the table. But I think most people who have been in journalism have thought through that question before. And I think there are some jobs where I want to feel good about what I'm doing in a day. And so
you don't want to work for Lucky Strike?
Exactly. There's certain, clients or jobs where you're not necessarily going to be telling the truth in communications that do not appeal to me. And I think that might be also for a lot of reasons why it took me this long to make the leap, because I did have a clean conscience working in public media news. The only thing that we were aiming toward every day was to be correct. And
how often were you correct, do you think?
It was a pretty good batting average.
75%, 90%?
The station had a what I call the wall of shame, where a corrections page, and we could go a couple months without having to touch that, which was always a good feeling.
Oh, that's impressive. So there's an opening right now in the Hochul administration, the role of press secretary. Is that a job you would find interesting, or working in politics more broadly, or do you want to stay the heck away from those more controversial topics?
Well, I think the truth is I don't know yet. I've never done this before, and I'm going into it eyes wide open for sure. I think that sounds like a very hard job. Obviously we've both been around people in Albany who had jobs like that, and they're demanding, and a lot of times, people are you got all different stakeholders to deal with and that kind of thing. So right now I'm just like looking at this as one change in my life from doing news to going into the state, and I do not know what the future holds, but I'm humble about it. I've grappled with the fact that it's going to be new, and I'll have to learn what I'm doing.
It's been about a decade since I worked in the communications space. I was doing it for a member of the assembly, and there were times where what I was putting out was completely contrary to my own personal beliefs.
Oh, really?
And I have to imagine that's one of the concerns you have moving into this space, because as an interviewer, you can ask whatever you want. You're not necessarily held responsible for those views or anything. Is that something you're concerned about, or do you feel like in a space like the Office of Mental Health, it's not necessarily, again, like you're pushing Lucky Strike cigarettes?
Well, I think they obviously do really important work, and that's important to me. And I'm also excited to be, on a team. And I think being on a team, pushing in the same direction, and I think that's what it'll be like. I mean, we'll find out, but I'm prepared to be putting my personal brand up on a shelf, and that was part of the decision to get out of the broadcasting side of it and daily news. And I've got a archive to look back on if I need to.
In case your ego ever needs a little boost. Remember that
Exactly.
time I did a debate, or I was on TV with Dave one time, that type of stuff?
Exactly. And there's a C-SPAN file photo of me with my mouth open, if I ever need to go look at it.
So you're not concerned about taking that back seat? Because I know that my own ego, I am aware of this, would struggle with moving behind the scenes. And it's one of the reasons I haven't, probably.
Because I've been looking back of late, the last couple of weeks, going through this departure process. When I was starting out, I had a huge ego about it. I looked at the clips, and I could feel the serotonin or dopamine boost or whatever. I don't think it's like that for me anymore. I don't know if that's just age or being more comfortable in my own skin or whatever, but I started getting less interested in that.
I do like the idea that you're comfortable in your own skin. As someone who's known you for a couple decades now, I don't think that's the case, but you feel like you're comfortable in your own skin?
I don't know about like on a day-to-day existence plane, but I mean like professionally, as I had more years in the field and journalism, like I'll be honest with you, this right now is pretty uncomfortable for me, and being the center of attention like I've been the past couple of weeks. When I was in the station, a lot of what I did was like in a dark room by myself, maybe a guest
that wasn't
on the
job-related stuff, though.
And it wasn't like, on TV most of the time, or standing up with a camera or that kind of thing. So I was able to do it, even though it was my voice and my name. There was some anonymity to it. And I found that I needed the attention way less. And I was more focused on if the work was any good. And I think that was just like a maturing process, honestly, because when I was starting out, I mean, when you're new and you're 23, 24, like your work isn't very good most of the time, but you have this belief that it's like so important, and oh man, look at this clip, and I got this on the front page or whatever. And I've kind of left that behind, I think.
Well, I can't speak to your success or failures as a manager of people, but what I can talk about is your skill as an interviewer. And the thing that I'm always impressed by is the breadth of knowledge that you bring to the interviews that you would do, and the way you were able to frame questions in such an articulate manner, something that I strive for, and I don't feel like I necessarily hit, and I'm almost never prepared. When it comes to politicians, how would you try to prepare for those interviews? And I imagine they were different than, say, one of your many interviews with the Simpson writers, or one of the many interviews with like Graham Nash. And did you try to like lock people down and have this idea that, oh, I can frame a question just the right way, or I can lead them into a trap? Talk about how you prepared for political interviews.
It's interesting because nothing gave me more stress in the time I was there. I talked with a lot of members of Congress for this series, The Congressional Corner, and like they're very good in most cases. They're trained, they're media trained, they have talking points, they have literally like what the party line is going to be on stuff. They've workshopped what their position is on things, and I think it's hard sometimes to get nuance or some kind of new answer out of them. But the other thing I found with that show in particular is that like Congress is pretty opaque. There's committees, and there's markups, and there's votes before the votes, and there's closed door conference votes before the vote, and when you kind of have to like really do a deep dive to be able to ask people what they're working on in a way that has any sort of like knowledge to it. A lot like state government, I think. It can get lost in the jargon sometimes. And so if, to the extent that I ever did do that well, I mean, I'll buy your premise, but it always made me nervous because, and then there's also, and we saw this a lot in the last several years, like sometimes the audience is egging you on to have a fight with somebody. You know, like there's a member of Congress they just don't agree with, and they want you to just nail them on such and such vote. I kind of looked at like my job was to ask them why they voted the way they voted, give them a chance to explain it. If their explanation didn't hold water, try to press them on it. But ultimately, like I wasn't trying to badger them. And I think our audience sometimes wanted that more than just like, here's what your member thinks and here's their explanation for it. And I don't know that I'm like, you know, Dan Abrams level of questioning.
Don't know who that is.
But like as a, you know, I'm not like some sort of prosecuting DA who could.
Daniel Caffey.
Who's that?
A Few Good Men, Tom Cruise.
Oh, okay, yeah, exactly.
You can't handle the truth.
No, I don't know that I ever had moments like that, but there was one interesting recent one with a member, a would-be member of Congress who was running for the special election that didn't happen and just like wouldn't say who he
Blake Jellybean
voted for president.
Yes, and I really liked the way that you came at that reluctance from different angles. It wasn't just about like, well, why not? Well, why not? You framed it as, don't you think people have a reason to, or blah, 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 blah. And I thought that was really impressive. So I want to turn to something that may be self-evident at this point, but you and I have an existing relationship, and you've got other friends who are Capitol reporters. So I'm curious how, if at all, you're looking to capitalize on those existing relationships in your new job. Are you going to be putting the screws to us, blackmailing us, etc.? Has the Hochul administration begun pumping you for our weaknesses, for dirt? What's your approach to that?
Well, I think the weaknesses are already on display. They don't need me for that.
Wow.
No, nothing like that. And I'm sure that we'll keep it professional. You know, a lot of people, it's a small town and people know each other, and everyone's got a job to do, and that's kind of how my mind is on it.
But is that going to be part of your job, interacting with the LCA, being the LCA whisperer, so to speak, for the Office of Mental Health? Because I think that is an underrated function of communications professionals, the people who have an understanding of what the reporters are looking for and how best to make pitches. There are some people who are really good at it. I think about Tim Ruffinen in the Division of Budget, Janine Cava at DCJS, even your current boss, Justin Mason, Office of Mental Health, are good at it. Some people are bad at it. Will you be one of the LCA whisperers, you think?
Well, let me give you a PR answer. I'm going to do whatever they want me to do, and I'm going to do it the best I can. I hope, dealing with reporters, I think, is really important. I value that, and if that's part of what I end up working on, then, I'm happy to.
Have you been testing your vocal cords to see what level of screaming you can get up to?
I'm not much of a screamer, am I? I don't.
No, it's more like the occasional expletive when you do something in softball, and it's usually not warranted in any way, shape, or form.
I think that's true.
I know it's true.
The one thing that I am aware of is that like a state office and a newsroom are two different places, and I'm gonna watch the language.
Interesting. You were at WAMC during a time when it was must-listen radio for the people at the Capitol, because your former boss, Alan Chartock, would have regular interviews with then-Governor Andrew Cuomo. I guess that depended on the relationship at the day. How did those interviews come together?
The whole arc of it was fascinating. Alan Chartock, who kind of, cast a long shadow around, state government,
for a short
broadcasting guy. And that kind of thing. And so for people who might not remember, he had done this series over almost 2 decades of weekly interviews with Governor Mario Cuomo. And they continued on, after he had left office. And so there was a really long WAMC Cuomo bond. Alan wrote a book, me and Mario, and then in 2002, when Andrew Cuomo ran a primary against Carl McCall for governor, that relationship kind of ended because Allen had criticized the move, more or less. So from that point on, Andrew Cuomo, ran for Attorney General, and then Elliot Spitzer resigned. It left the opening for Cuomo to kind of push Patterson out of the way. For the first 2 terms of that administration, we didn't have, Governor Cuomo on at all. And a few times it maybe got a little close. I know that we had Bob Duffy on, Lieutenant Governor. We had Larry Schwartz on. So like we were getting, into the
closer and closer in the circle. Yeah.
But in retrospect, I mean, Andrew Cuomo was pretty savvy about what interviews he did and didn't do. And so I remember right after the second reelection, the phone rang and they were like, hey, it's time to like bury the hatchet, basically.
Who calls?
I want to say Mr. Azzopardi called Allen, but he may have called me first. I don't remember exactly, but and they clearly were like, okay, it's a new term. Let's, wipe this slate clean. And I think he came on like the week after that. It was November, so must have been 2018. Mm-hmm. And if I'm remembering the timeline right, but from that point on, then it was a whole different. We went from having no access at all to the total opposite, especially when things would ramp up with like Mayor de Blasio and he was always strategic about wanting to come on to shape a news cycle or that kind of thing. And then it was, you went from no calls in 8 years to, a bunch of calls a day.
How much advance warning would you get before learning that the governor wanted to come on WMC?
It depended. I mean, sometimes it was like, we're going to do next Thursday. And sometimes it was like, hey, can you be on at 3? And then, you were almost really not in a position to say no most of the time.
Did you guys ever say no?
I mean, a couple times, like we were doing a fundraiser or something and it just wasn't possible, or we just didn't have like the personnel on a given day. But for the most part, it was like, a new special basically that was airing a couple times a week at some points.
With everybody at the Capitol listening and transcribing, because like you said, it was the governor trying to get his message out and going through Allen. If the governor's team gives you a couple hours notice, not a lot of time to prepare, but I'm curious in general, how did Allen prepare for these interviews and what was your role in trying to get Allen ready?
Well, when I first got there to the station,
17 years ago.
And this isn't, I'm not blowing smoke, but I had this morning shift, right? I had to be there by 5. And when I got there, Allen would be there reading every newspaper at his desk, like every state government article he could find. So he was always pretty up on, what was going on around here in this building. And especially when he was coming down to do the Legislative Gazette and just kind of staying in touch with people. And so his knowledge base for like New York State government history and all the past wars and everything like that was pretty good. And then I just had like a running topic list of, stuff that was in the news, or especially a lot of this was like during COVID. So like that was changing all the time. And you wanted to make sure like if there was a change in policy or whatever, that was getting covered. And then, to be honest, so much of what happened between the two of them was unpredictable from both sides. And, you would just listen along with everyone else and see where it went. And I know, he made a couple of like high profile errors on that.
Well, let's talk about that. In 2019, the governor came on the air, fired up about some writing about slurs used against Italian Americans, and he dropped the N-word.
He did.
On the show.
Yep.
Do you remember hearing that? Do you remember your reaction? Do you remember the fallout? What was that like?
I remember all of it, and I remember being like, this is going to be national news.
Did you guys try to hit like the cough button or something like that?
The governor can, if that's what he wants to do in that situation, he can do it. But it was interesting when the mayoral primary was coming up, like that soundbite was still making the rounds. And some people, because it was a few years ago, just didn't remember it or whatever. And yeah, sure enough, you can hear him do it. There was that one, and I remember, when it was over, just being like, we got to like brace for web traffic, and this is going to be a big deal.
Do you try to promote it? Do you try to say governor says N-word on our show?
I don't think so. I don't think we did that.
Reach out to the other stations. Hey, who wants to hear the governor say the N-word?
Here's the soundbite.
Yeah.
I remember the other one that sticks out is during the pandemic, it was Thanksgiving, and Alan was like, "Hey, you know, what are you doing for Thanksgiving?" And he's like, "Oh, I'm having my whole family over to the mansion, and my mom's coming up." And like his mom was up in age at the time, and the guidance at the time was not to have gatherings and to have Zoom Thanksgiving because of COVID. So he got in some hot water for that because it was obviously different than what the public policy was at the time.
So you kind of danced around it, and maybe you don't want to address it, but as a listener to Alan, maybe in those later years, it sounded like his questions were coming right off the dome. It was maybe what he was thinking about, and the depth of knowledge that you talked about was all 10, 20, 30 years earlier. So was that ever difficult to listen to, given that I know you are someone who did continue to stay abreast of the news and probably was offering a whole variety of well-informed questions and not necessarily just like, "Hey, Gov, what do you think about this?"
Well, I'll say this. I mean, I learned a lot from watching him do it, and I think everyone knew what they were getting with going on with Alan. I mean, he's one of a kind.
Yes, for good and bad.
And like no one does it the way that he does it, and so like I have to respect the fact that, and in my job at the time, I did that. Like we were getting Governor Cuomo on because of who Alan was and the history that he had, and my job wasn't to say, you know, like here's how I would do this or here's how I wouldn't do this. I did have one chance to do it when Alan was like under the weather, and Governor Cuomo came on with me and like immediately made fun of Alan for not being there. But no, I mean I can understand that like everyone has their own way of doing it. I don't mind telling this because it's funny to me, but you know, I prepared a lot of stuff for him when I worked there, and we kind of had almost a winking dance that we would do where I would kind of give him the materials I prepared, and you know, he'd sit down and kind of move it over and then, you know, do the interview. And that was his approach the whole time. I mean, really, he didn't want to be tied down to like this is quote unquote the question that should be asked or whatever. And yeah, I mean, like I don't do it that way. And I guess I didn't do it that way. I'm not doing it now, but I was motivated more by fear of inadequacy in my interviews, I think. So I always wanted to make sure that I did have prep work in front of me, you know.
How has state government interrupted your life? I know the demands of a newsroom obviously go beyond 9 to 5, but state government in particular, are there any events or incidents that you recall that disrupted barbecues or made family gatherings tougher to have? And anything that stand out?
I remember sitting in a parking lot of a big box store on a Sunday afternoon. I went in to exchange a seltzer tank. And I ended up spending an hour sitting in the car on a conference call with an embattled governor at the time, who this was well after he kind of stopped doing the station, and during that period of months when he was trying to stay in office and under investigations. And there are a lot of times like that I can think of, like, you know, and you've been through this more than I have, but like during budget talks, you know, a red room gets announced at like 7:30 p.m. or whatever, and you obviously have to stop what you're doing. You got to pay attention to it. You got to make sure that whatever announcement is coming out of that is covered adequately. I don't know if it's like this for you, but when we were covering state government, a lot of what we did was like pre-writes that then had to be thrown out when whatever the news would change, and trying to stay up on that. Obviously with late budgets, that adds to it because you don't know what the schedule is going to be anymore. You know, you had that April 1st idea in your head, and now every week is kind of a question mark the rest of the year. Let me tell you one story from, I think, my second week of work on a personal level. I just started. It was right before Christmas, and so the legislature came back at the beginning of January, and I got sent down to the Capitol to go to the press conference and the gaggle with Richard Ravitch, who was overseeing one of his many MTA plans at the time.
So he must have been lieutenant governor at the time.
He wasn't yet.
Not yet. This is pre-2009.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was 2000. It was probably just the beginning of 2009.
Okay.
But he was there to talk about saving the MTA. And our colleagues at WNYC were very interested in receiving that audio. And I went down. I did not know what I was doing. Came back to the station and just had not recorded it.
And what'd you do?
Well, I mean, first thing I did was like run to the restroom and like vomit. I thought I was going to be fired on the spot. I was like sick to my stomach. I'm feeling that feeling right now, thinking about how stressed out
I'm going to double. We're recording here. We're good for this because I have forgotten to hit record multiple times.
And I remember my boss. I came back and because we're looking at the same sort of equipment, but ours was a few generations before this, a Marantz. I did not really know how.
You think your Marantz is older than this?
The one that I'd had at the time.
Okay.
And I didn't really know how to use it, as I found out. And my boss was like, she knew that I was new, and she was trying not to make me feel worse, but she was so mad. And then she ended up calling other outlets that had maybe covered the press conference and asking if like we could get their tape of it, and it was a wild goose chase. Anyway, that popped into my head when you asked me about state government interrupting, because that was like my trial by fire. That was the first thing I did, and I kind of never wanted to repeat blowing it that badly after that.
Well, at your going away party recently, you told an anecdote about going to work on January 1st, 2015, following the scoop from the great Nick Reisman of Politico New York that Mario Cuomo was dead, and you actually had to call your now wife into action to a certain degree. Can you talk about that day?
Yes. I don't mind telling these stories because it's ancient history now, but we should have been better prepared for that than we were. Like, Mario, I think, lived to be 82 or so. And he was known to be in not great health. And the station had an incredible backlog of, interviews and speeches and things like that. And so in retrospect, my lesson from that was like, we got to better prepare for other ones of these. And after that experience, I was like, we need to do the same thing with Pete Seeger and not be caught flat-footed. But anyway.
Well, wasn't Pete Seeger like 100 at the time?
He was over 90 for sure. But yeah, Nick broke the story. And it was New Year's Day, and I think I was like going to start a movie or something. Instead, I came right into the station, and I called my colleague Sarah LeDuc, and Aaron came with. And
Aaron is your then girlfriend, now wife.
Right. And I was like, we're starting from scratch here, but we got to like go on the air, basically. Alan was already on Spectrum when I got to the station. He was on the phone talking to Spectrum News. So I remember like kind of having to scramble for a little while before we were able to get him on to talk about his long history with the governor and everything like that. And then just kind of going through the archives, and the Capitol reporter for New York State Public Radio at the time, Karen DeWitt, had done like a profile, an evergreen profile that you could roll out. But there have been a lot of days like that where stuff happens at weird times, or, overnights with the big ugly. I remember when same-sex marriage made it through the legislature. That was, if I remember correctly, that was like a Saturday night or something.
Summer of 2011. I don't remember the day, though.
And it was one of those, I mean, it was a huge news at the time. And we had to cover it, and we had to make sure like we had the website updated on it and all that stuff. So there have been a lot of those cases over the years where, and it's news, so things are not happening at convenient times always, for sure.
We are back with Working Rules, the new weekly segment exploring conversations here in the LCA press room, and our inaugural guinea pig is Dan Clark, author of the Capitol Confidential newsletter. Thanks for going on this test drive with me, Dan.
Oink, oink.
So this week's episode is an exit interview with Ian Pickus, and it comes at the same time as some LCA departures, including Mike Gormley and Zach Williams. And I have a tough time with change of any kind, so I'm particularly struggling with the idea of these faces that I'm so used to seeing not being here on a regular basis. And then there's what it means for the press corps itself, which is a loss of institutional memory and talent. Do these changes weigh on you at all, or do you just put on your headphones and bang out another newsletter, regardless of who's around.
It does make me a little sad when it happens because, as LCA members, we're on our own islands for our news outlets, right?
Yeah.
For the Times Union, we have 5 or 6 people down here. But
Yeah, it seems like it's constantly growing.
Yes.
You got a new one every day.
We're very successful. We don't need to tell you. So, I'm in my own little space on my island. But from a journalist perspective, like this is our newsroom, is everybody in the LCA, even though we're competing against each other. So anytime we lose somebody, especially somebody who's been here a long time, like Gormley and like Zach Williams, it's a little bittersweet because you're happy for them for moving on to retirement or another opportunity. But you're also so right about the institutional knowledge and just the camaraderie too.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of like a family in the sense that there are people like Gormley who are paternal figures, and there are people like Zach who, hopefully you can hear this, is, the weird cousin. And but then there's other people you just you don't like, you don't want to see them, and they're going to come here, but that's family, I guess.
That is family, and that's exactly how I describe it too.
And I think in families, you sometimes blink and somehow you are no longer the young nephew, you're the old uncle, or maybe you're the parent. And I feel the same way here in the LCA, where overnight it seems like I became a senior member of the LCA, and you're a couple years younger than me, but started as basically a reporter out of the womb for Spectrum, I think.
Yeah.
So do you grapple with that at all, or are you like, yeah, this is fine, I'm just becoming more senior, and people just have to respect me and put up with me?
It's weird, right? Because when I came into the LCA, the senior members, no offense against them, were all older people, like people in their 50s, 60s, nearing retirement. Now the, quote, older members of the LCA are like you and me in our 30s, and we've been here the longest, more than anybody else, you, me, and a couple of other people. And it's strange to think about because I don't know, I had never thought about myself that way until a couple of years ago when there was a lot of turnover in the LCA, and me thinking, from my perspective, I'm not going anywhere anytime soon. Like, I like this beat, I like where I work, I love being in the LCA, but other people don't see it that way. So in some ways, I feel kind of like a graveyard keeper, in the sense that I'm always going to be there, and other people are just coming in and out.
And that idea of people being older, I don't know how much of that is the fact that when I started, I was 22, so everybody, if you were in your 30s, you looked older, but there's also the fact that people just aged older. You look at these pictures around the LCA and you're like, this guy must have been 70. And it's like, no, he was 41. He just smoked like 3 packs a day and was drinking heavily. I want to turn, though, to a LinkedIn post you shared, which I got a little sentimental about when I read it. And you were talking about your time now in this space of writing a newsletter, and just how you never expected it to be, I think, as successful or as maybe long-running as it has been to this point. What does it mean to you to be in this spot and to have really, as an outside observer, carved out a niche that seems perfect for you?
It feels really special. It feels very fulfilling, and it feels more than anything really validating. With Capital Confidential, I've done something that has not been done here. And when we launched it and when I say that, I mean, we have different sections in the newsletter that other reporters don't have in their newsletters. We have different information that other people aren't focusing on. We cover different topics that other reporters just aren't going to get into.
The tone is different too.
The tone is very different. It's very conversational, very casual. I want it to feel like I am speaking to you, like you're receiving this email directly from me. And in some senses you are. It's just there are many thousands of you. But it feels good because now, a year and a half later, it's become very real that people really appreciate that and appreciate the variety and appreciate knowing things that otherwise may not be in the news cycle. And I think that we've really carved out that space to just be that voice that you may not have heard otherwise in the LCA. And it's not to the fault of anybody else, any other reporters. I mean, everybody is kind of held to the news cycle, and we are so lucky to be so incredibly successful at the Times Union, to have such a big bureau.
Sure.
So I have, I have that space to focus on that myself, while the other reporters at the TU can handle more of the daily coverage, which I pitch in onto.
But the project also speaks to the institutional knowledge that you bring in this role, because one of the ever-changing faces in the TU bureau might not necessarily be able to, definitely couldn't do the same thing because they don't know some of the backstories or the drama or who to talk to when one person says X and you need to get that Y opinion, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, for example, when you did the podcast about the coup, when you were at the TU, I mean, a reporter coming into the LCA now would not be able to do that. It would take so much research and so many different perspectives, whereas what happened back then, and I know what has happened in the time that I've been here. I know the big power players. I know who has led the conversations on what. And that's been incredibly helpful because I can provide context that somebody else may not be able to provide around really big issues like energy affordability, like crime rates. Oftentimes we find that people are really just comparing now to maybe last year or now to even 4 years ago. Whereas I like to take data that goes a little bit further than that and institutional knowledge that goes a little bit further than that, because a lot of the time on these issues, including on Medicaid, it's kind of like a domino effect where we see the spending go up so much, right? But that's not just a recent thing. Something set that into motion in the state. And to have that knowledge right off the bat is incredibly helpful. And I think our readers appreciate it.
I think there is something to be said, though, about the idea that if you are a good reporter, you can be thrown into any setting. You can be thrown into an Olympic coverage. You can be thrown into the aftermath of a school shooting. You can be thrown into the New York State Capitol, and you can figure it out. But I do think that it takes time to wrap your head around Planet Albany, and maybe it helps, though, to have fresh eyes from time to time, because I often think that we become sort of immune or desensitized to some of the things that happen around here. It'd be like, oh yeah, sure, the speaker just brings his dog around here, or yeah, the governor is going to take a couple questions, but not all the questions. And the idea of fresh eyes and people questioning the status quo seems important, and something that I try to shake myself loose from. And the New York Times will shuffle people in and out of here, and they will try to keep people, from getting, I guess, roots that become too strong here, and you become part of the institution. What do you think of that idea about moving on and that having benefit, like basically burning down a forest to regrow it healthy?
Well, I think that we often get stuck in a revolving door of issues at the state capitol. And I think you're exactly right to have new people come in and kind of say something that maybe we weren't thinking about, or find an angle that maybe we weren't thinking about. Because it really, at the end of the day, what we do is a conversation between us as journalists and everybody else on the other side of it. And if the other people on the other side of it, including lawmakers, advocates, and even readers, aren't aware of what's happening in a certain field or a certain issue or topic area or a geographical location in the state, I mean, to have somebody come in and bring that perspective, I think can be really useful, not only to us, but to the public as well, who's reading us. And you're right about the Times. They do cycle people in and out. And I think that can be beneficial to an extent. I would like people to stick around a little bit longer personally, because I love having people here. But I also think the reporters at the Times have been excellent. And, some of them have moved on to many, many great things. So in some ways, you can see this place as a stepping stone. But I often remind people that New York State by itself is the 12th, I believe, largest economy in the world. So covering this beat at the state capitol is more important than a lot of other things you could do even in this country. And
at some point, the shuffling contributes to the fact that the New York Times needs, 4 bylines just to cover any story. Finally, I have some business to take care of, because you are the Times Union reporter who has the most time at the Capitol, even more than your editor. LCA dues. It's come to my attention that you guys are a little delinquent in 2025. Do you have a plan for getting everybody to pay up? Because we've got plans. I see Raga Justin just walked by. She hasn't paid up. What are your plans? Because I, as LCA president, would like to spend that money. So
Great
what's
question.
the timeline?
I have no idea. I couldn't even tell you if I paid my dues this year.
You haven't.
Oh, well.
You haven't. So
my plan is to pay my dues at some point. I did.
And not just your metaphorical dues, Dan.
Yes, my actual money dues. Which is funny because I think that means I must have paid my 2024 dues like 2 months ago. So.
Gotcha. Or it's possible John Campbell, our treasurer, or one of our two treasurers, gave me wrong information at the Zach Williams going away party when, of course, we were talking LCA business.
No, because since I joined the Times Union in 2024, I've definitely only paid my dues once.
Well, we've been speaking with Dan Clark. This was the inaugural, hopefully first of many, working rules segments that we will use to touch on some of the weekly events, maybe things a little more topical than this. But Dan, thanks for trying it out, and I hope you don't have any side effects.
I hope so too. Thank you.
You'll be my friend even in this, after part of my media life.
We'll see.